Welcome to Amidon Planet. I'm your host, Joel Amidon. Thank you for joining me in this never-ending quest to learn how to teach better. Today on episode 111 of the podcast, we are talking about AI in education with Marc Watkins. Now, Marc is here at the University of Mississippi, and he is got a lot of titles. He's an academic innovation fellow, lecturer of writing and rhetoric, and serves as a director of the AI Summer Institute for Teachers of Writing at the University of Mississippi. He might have some other titles that he shared within the episode that we'll get to in a second, but for those that have subscribed to the Amidon Planet download, you know that this episode has been in the works for a bit. And if you're not subscribed to the Amidon Planet download, you can go to amidonplanet.com. Anywhere there's a button that says join the email list, you click that, you can join the email list, and you'll get the next edition of the Amidon Planet download. Anyway, last summer, I participated in the AI Summer Institute offered by the Department of Writing and Rhetoric and the Institute of Data Science, again, here at the University of Mississippi. Marc was a big driver of that institute, just shared a ton of knowledge and just eye-opening about what AI could do at that time. Now it's a year later, and we know how fast this stuff is going. And again, that's why I want to have Marc on, and probably why I want to have Marc on again and again to kind of give us the current, state of affairs of where we're at with AI in education. And also too, I'm an anxious person, and something like AI in education kind of makes me a little anxious, right? And you're thinking about what does it mean for me in my field? And I guess that could probably go for anyone, a lot of fields out there for what AI means. And reassuringly, what comes back to it is the role of humanity in all of this, that what can drive this work. And so want to just point that out, knowing that, I follow Marc on LinkedIn and get to see all the different things he's coming to, and he's got a great perspective. And again, that's what makes him to be a good guest on the podcast, because what we're doing is learning how to teach better. And I know that after this conversation, I would definitely know how to teach better, especially in the realm of thinking about AI, but then also too just thinking about the general learnings about how am I leaning into my humanity through my teaching, right? Are the platforms getting in the way, or am I using them as a way to accentuate connections between myself and my students? And so, anyway, I don't want to delay because he shares a lot of good stuff, and we'll put a lots in the show notes, so be sure to look at amidonplanet.com/episode 111. Without further delay, here is Marc Watkins talking about AI in education. Marc Watkins, welcome to Amidon Planet. How are you?
I'm doing well, Joel. How are you doing today?
Doing well. I was, we're just making a few jokes about how fast things move in this world that we're going to be diving into here. But, let's just start here. So can you introduce yourself and give us a brief overview of your role here at the University of Mississippi?
I'd love to. So my name is Marc Watkins. I'm a lecturer of writing and rhetoric, and I'm also the director of the Mississippi AI Institute for Teachers, and I'm also an academic innovation fellow. So 3 titles all in one. 2 of those were just invented to deal with the AI stuff, if you can imagine.
Yeah. And we were, kind of laughing about that. We kind of talked to, or I was talking to you about this a year ago, because we were doing a 2-day workshop on AI, and you kind of, I don't know, the Department of Writing and Rhetoric, or if that was the university at large, had some folks just kind of trying to dive into this space. And that was, again, a year ago, and thinking about all that's happened within a year. It's kind of, we'll talk about the anxiety in a sec, but there's a lot going on.
Yeah, we were really fortunate enough to be able to do our very first Institute for Teachers back in July of last year, and Joel was part of it, which was great. We loved having you there too. And I think we had 23 faculty members, and it was a day and a half. And we've since been able to do that in the wintertime too. And we were extending that from a day and a half to 3 full days. And we were able to, I think, host over 60 faculty members here from the University of Mississippi. So. Yeah. And we'll have another one here in August if everything works out okay and I don't just drop like a stone at this stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and personal friend of Stephen Monroe, and he's been on top of the all this AI conversation. But I think a lot of that would come from you and your interest in it. So, how did you first become interested in this intersection of AI and education?
Completely by accident. It was way back in May of 2022. A friend of mine who was writing copy for online websites sent me a link to a program called Jasper, which was one of the very first AI programs that OpenAI sort of released with their API. And so with Jasper, you could do any type of AI writing. And I played around with it. I was like, this is just insane. And within a week of that, in late May, OpenAI opened up their playground so you could have access to GPT-3. And so my job after I saw that was to go around as sort of like the town crier of the university. I bring my laptop with people. And when you generate stuff, the text would be highlighted green. So it was this weird sort of experience.
Mm.
And I would just go around on campus and basically be like, look, no, sit down 2 minutes, just look at this. And like anyone, I freaked out. I think most people did when they saw ChatGPT in November of 2022. I just freaked out earlier because I had a little bit earlier access.
Yeah.
And we shifted from that freak out period, which we spent about a good 48 hours basically asking some very severe existential questions
Yeah.
about the world. But we shifted very quickly to say, well, this technology's here. We can't ban it necessarily for a lot of reasons.
Right.
But how can we actually use this to actually help support learning in some ways? And that's what we started doing here. And we've been now really at this breakneck pace for almost 2 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to, I guess, back up just for a second, and then you kind of touched on it a little bit, and people have probably most likely have played with it, but maybe not. For listeners who might not be as familiar, can you just explain what generative AI is and how it works, or just kind of give us or even just AI in general, like, the things that you're looking at with regards to AI and education, just what is it?
That's a great question. So AI has existed for decades. And really, it is much more of a marketing term to talk about really advanced machine learning using neural networks. It's not the AI from the Terminator. It's not the AI from the Matrix. It's very sophisticated predictive software that uses tokens to sort of train and guess what the next answer is going to be. And for the last 18 months or so, since ChatGPT was launched, we've been dealing with what are called large language models, which are generally just models of a language. They have some limited reasoning ability to understand how language works. What's a little bit challenging with that is we're going from the field of large language models now into large multimodal models, which go beyond language, that go into areas of speech, audio for music, also for vision for images, and also for video too, and for coding. So it's a much more advanced version of the existing software that's just now sort of becoming launched and available to the public for free. And it has some very interesting use cases, how you use it. And it's also, as we say before too, we were joking before we started this, the anxiety factor too is very real.
Well, and that's what I want to get into first. I mean, and I was, and maybe, we joked about it being a year since we kind of first talked about, recording an episode like this, which it seems like we probably should record one maybe once a month, like just the updates. But maybe it was about because I'm an anxious person and I worry, constantly and just like, and I follow you on LinkedIn. So I'm I see the things that are happening on and which we'll put a link to your LinkedIn so people can get access to the great stuff that you post there. But how have you observed like the emotional responses of students and educators in thinking about AI in the classroom or just AI in general? And maybe what steps do you take to address that or even just to deal with it? Be like, well, like you said, the 48 hours, like, all right, I'm going to come back, like, and just deal for a second. I don't know, just dealing with that emotional side of this work.
Yeah, I mean, it's very different whatever stakeholder you're talking to. For a student, they're really looking for faculty for any type of guidance about what to do with this, to use it ethically, or even what it is. They are getting a lot of this information from social media, whether it's influencers marketing different AI techniques to them that go beyond text generation. to just flat out cheating. One of the programs that is using OpenAI's API called Answers AI, and I know you're a math guy, this is probably
Hmm.
going to make you a little bit anxious, but it uses GPT's vision component to take pictures of math questions and generate a response. Now, generative AI in general is not very good at answering math questions, but even if the actual model defaults at about 70% accuracy rate, if you think about for a math course,
Yeah.
sometimes if it's curved up, that's generally going to
You're
get
doing pretty
you,
good. Yeah.
yeah, you're doing pretty good at it. And so I think a lot of the STEM faculty that I talked to were just kind of like, well, look, we've dealt with Wolfram and we've dealt with this stuff for a few years in different forms. They weren't really prepared for seeing how students can just using an app on their phone, take a picture of a math question and get a generative response within a few seconds. Um, and so what I've really been trying to do with faculty is talk with them about how this thing called ChatGPT isn't just generative AI.
Hmm.
That's just one sort of interface for it too. And the technology, like we just mentioned, can be used for math questions. We've tested it now with students. It could be used to help augment their reading, can be used to deal with the same thing with critical note taking for research. And now tutoring, which is the new system that was just announced from Khan Academy and demoed from OpenAI. So you can actually have a tutor look at you using the AI with a camera, and the AI is going to then judge your emotional state because of look at your face and hear your voice. A completely synthetic voice, the one they used sounded like Scarlett Johansson for the demo, and she was
Yeah.
very upset, rightfully so,
Hmm.
is then going to tell you what you need to do to answer a problem or to give you counseling in your world. And so, really, what we're doing at this stage is just trying to get everyone involved, from students to faculty and administration, to just realize that we are so far beyond that sort of text generation of ChatGPT that we really need to start thinking about how this technology is going to shape not just our assessments, but learning itself. And what's good about that, and also what's very anxious inducing about it for me too, and ways we can actually sort of safeguard our learning so that it isn't completely offloaded to an algorithm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, and you're coming from a department of writing rhetoric. I'll throw it back at you. You're throwing the math at me. I'll throw it back. I mean, just thinking about
Yeah, yeah.
like the capabilities just from a writing perspective. I think that's what, when most people are seeing, like, hey, give me I think you had us use like I'm going to use the wrong terminology. You can only like a profile. Like I created like a profile of a university professor that loves the Muppets. And then I was
Yeah.
I wrote an article to the New York Times about the lack of choices on the Chipotle menu. And they had to reference the Muppets 5 different times. And I mean, within seconds, it did that. And it was like a very creative piece of writing that I was proud to have constructed with my prompt. But it was one of those things like, oh, wow, that kind of changes that. So like thinking about that from your perspective, from a writing perspective, like how does that, what does that do to your consideration as someone who's thinking about writing?
Well, that's a great question too. And the exercise that you did was creating your own persona using prompt engineering too. And that's something that I think was something of a wake-up call to a lot of people because they play around with ChatGPT. Its default mode is this really boring, robotic sort of voice. They don't realize that it's just like clay. You can make it to
Mm-hmm.
anything that you want, depending on what questions you ask. And for a writing perspective, that's very challenging because, we want our students to complete their assessments in terms of using their own voice.
Right.
And one challenge I had this last semester too is I was using reflection as a genre of writing for students to report their learning. And generally speaking, you would not associate AI being used for that. And I tell them, like, look, there's lots of different use cases you can use this technology. Reflective writing, asking about yourself, your own learning, your own emotional states, not one of them. And I still had 4 or 5 students last semester too try to get past me by submitting reflections using AI. And I told them, I was like, this sits out like a sore thumb. You're talking about yourself in third person. And one of the actual responses said, as a large language model at the end of it, which is also the other thing that's, kind of a dead giveaway. You're using AI.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, these things too, like it's not the situation where you can take a student up on charges for academic misconduct for it too, because it's very difficult to prove. But
Mm-hmm.
you also want to focus on the fact that this needs to be a learning continuum. So I had to sit down with those students, had to talk with them and say, look, I want you guys to revise this, redo this. own voice because that matters to me. That's important to me. And I'm sorry if I did not make that clear to you the first time that your actual, learning mattered more to me than reading some aggregated stuff from a machine. And so just really getting them and talking to them about that and discussing that is really a big challenge for all writing instructors too. That's been a major thing. And we've been talking to our students about and talking to developers is that writing is not a problem for AI to solve.
Mm.
There's nothing deficient about your writing if you aren't comfortable enough to actually write me something too. If you're going to AI, we want you to be confident of the fact that even you're making errors, you're still learning in that process. If you offload that completely to a machine, then that's not a good situation to be in for sure. And we
Yeah.
want to try to avoid it. But yeah, I mean, it's across the board. It's in definitely in my discipline. It's going to be, I think, in virtually every discipline on this campus and every campus across the country that they have to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was just thinking too, like what would, a lot of times of, playing around with it, with the generative AI, with thinking about text generation and thinking about like some of my favorite books, like my favorite book of all time is The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway.
Uh-huh.
And I think about if generative AI was being used to like, produce that book, like part of the genius of Hemingway was those short, sentences, very, just like, and versus the flowiness that I see sometimes of iterative, some of the things that get put out with AI, like you lose that, like that voice and thinking about how, someone put something even in a way that you're like, wow, that doesn't quite make sense, but still somehow in the story it does. Right. And like the creativity that's involved within that. And not that, obviously can be, you could probably tell me probably 7 different things about that can use, models of what you've done before in order to generate more things. But there is something about about that creative process that happens within a person's head, or even in exchange with another person, that kind of creates something beautiful that gets lost a little bit.
Oh, I'm nodding my head enthusiastically. Absolutely. I mean, that's the main challenge with the technology is that it's just going to be able to do what was done before for the most part. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily going to give you, a new creation. Doesn't mean that it can't possibly do some weird mismatches of your style too, to give you some different ideas of things. But that thing that we're talking about too, that human creativity, that style, that sort of um, you know, thing that we would deal with that makes us very, for lack of a better word, very human, is not something we want to give away to a machine. We also
Right.
don't want to ever think about the fact that it could actually do these things either. I certainly don't, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that where the sort of argument is that you made a really wonderful, compelling case for this. And if I was this as a creative writing teacher, is like say, so I want you to write your own story now. What's that like to a maturing writer or maturing learner too, to realize that they're going to have to fail repeatedly to even get up to a level that would be something that someone else, an audience, would find competent, versus I'm going to go to a machine and have a generic, not in any way sort of insightful thing there, just produce of it too. And that's been the real challenge across education.
Yeah.
To use sort of the analogy of this, it's like basically not knowing how to ride a bike and someone coming along and saying you could go down, compete in the Tour de France using this wonderful thing called OpenAI,
Yeah.
and you don't ever have to learn how to ride a bike.
Right.
And we really do want to push back against that sort of like frictionless experience for our students too, and ensure that learning and that magic of learning stays in place.
Well, and I guess there's 2 things that you've said I want to push into. One was when your students pushed into AI to do a task that was not made to be done by AI, you pushed into relationship. Like
Mhm.
it's like they pushed more into that, and then you pushed into that, that teacher student relationship. The more humanity side was a response, and I think maybe there's a lesson there to be learned. But then also too, you talked about this frictionless, moving away from like the frictionless learning, where one is that, can you have frictionless? I wonder if can you actually have frictionless learning, and like where in math, the number one standard for mathematical practice is make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, and like perseverance means like there's struggle, and then like teachers are in the principles to actions from NCTM. You're getting a lot of math today, Mark. Sorry. They talk about promoting productive struggle, right? That means that there is like, oh man, how does this step not work, or what happened here? Or like, like I'm trying to, or like you hit a wall and you're trying to come up with a way to get around it, in tapping into creativity that way. And so like, how do we maintain that sort of, those sorts of activities within the learning environment?
That to me is the question of our generation. We're going to have to really ask, and we're going to have to do it very quickly. Something that came out 2 weeks ago during OpenAI's demo of their new model, which is called GPT-4 Omni, is that they used Saul Khan from Khan Academy, and he invited his son to do a math problem with him using this new system. And the system isn't just generating a math response. It's literally looking at his son's face, judging his emotional response with a camera and listening to his voice and using a synthetic voice to tell him what he's doing right or wrong as he's solving the problem on an iPad with a stylus. So for me, it's not just about can an AI do that? I don't even want to think about that. That's not the issue. The issue is what's that going to do to relationships with teaching and students? If this becomes normalized, that we actually allow AI to help us as a tutor or a teaching assistant or something along those lines, that can really fray those human relationships. And I don't have the answer to how to actually safeguard that yet. The other thing is too, universities make these decisions about buying this technology and turning it on for students. I thought for a very long time that would be sort of like a firewall that we would have here too, say like, okay, students are going to have to do this. They're not going to be able to pay $25, $30 a month to access it. Supposedly, OpenAI is now committed to releasing this technology for free for users, including the most advanced version of it too. So we really are at the sort of core of this gigantic human experiment that no one's asked us to be in part of.
Yeah.
And we're now trying to make these decisions in real time, juggling some really heavy sort of weighted consequences about what happens here. I could see from a K through 12 perspective, or even in our university, a really overworked faculty member or something else saying like, look, I want my AI to help me grade this stack of assessments I need to do, whether that's written assessments too, or math questions or something else too. And the AI will do that competently for the most part in about 34 or 40 seconds. So what does that though do to the person's relationship? If I'm getting a grade by an AI, is that going to mean that I'm going to change how I write because a machine's grading me, not a human being? Same thing about my interpersonal relationships. And really, we haven't even really had a chance to really sort of like calm down and ask those questions because we've just been on the sort of receiving end of this fire hose of AI deployments. So to me, if this is going to actually be useful for our students, the first thing we're going to have to ask is what sort of boundaries do we want to set up on this? And what sort of like off switches that we want to have in place? And I unfortunately don't have the answer to that yet.
So that kind of jumps into these like ethical considerations, right? That we need to consider. And I mean, like, for example, the thing that you're talking about, like inserting someone's paper into an AI system, like, I mean, you're basically, I mean, I guess let's just say that I have a paper that I need to grade, or let's go even more unethical. Like it's a dissertation that someone's given me that I need to read. Oh man, I need to provide some feedback on it. And like, just to put it into the AI and like considering that someone has selected me as a committee member, or maybe I'm the chair, that'd be worse. Holy cow. And said like, I want you on this for this particular purpose. And now I'm using a machine in order to provide feedback. I mean, it just goes like that. That seems so beyond in like on the wrong side of the ethics of that question. But like, so, but then where is the line, right? So like, where is the line, and how do we establish lines, or even like the gray area that's going to exist?
And that's to me, that's where this is at too, because in theory, the student could have then used AI somewhere in their dissertation too, right?
Right.
So like they're
Yeah.
using AI to do part of their dissertation. You're using AI to provide feedback, what's learned in that process.
Right. Right.
So where is the line? It's a great question. So let's keep with the dissertation example here as one
Yeah. Yeah.
example. So let's say you're trying to give feedback on like a 200-page dissertation.
Hmm.
You use AI not to give feedback, but you use AI to help your reading of the actual document. In this case, it produces manageable summaries of each chapter so that you can go back there and say clearly what's going on with this. So, what's ethical or unethical about that? This is the thing
Hmm.
where I'm kind of like scratching my head too, because, like,
Yeah.
obviously, if someone is producing a dissertation and you're the chair, or your second or third reader, they assume you're going to actually read it, right? Just like I assume when I assign my students something, fingers crossed, I hope they read it too. But when you can use AI to offload the process of reading something, that changes that sort of game. And I don't know where that line is because we have so many students with hidden disabilities right now that don't even go through the disability process,
Mm.
that struggle with reading, that struggle with comprehension, that are learning English as a second, third, or even fourth language.
Yes.
It becomes this sort of like onion where you peel back and there's more layers past more layers of it too. I think the best thing we can do right now at this point in time is to be open about it. And if you're going to use an AI reading assistant, you walk them through that process of here's my sort of process of using this with your document, whether this is a dissertation, an assignment the student wrote, or if I'm assigning a student something too, I want them to go through and talk about what they've used for AI and why they used it too.
Yeah. I could
Um,
see, could you see like even like I'm just, processing this because there's just some issues that come up, like just the APA, right?
mhm.
Just looking at a document from an APA perspective and, getting pretty good at that in my age now and doing it for so many years. But having like, well, is there, I mean, I'm sure there is like just a tool where they get, hey, looking at this document, provide, pointed feedback on APA 7's format requirements. I think that could be a pretty valuable thing. That's a low bar that, again, could help somebody move ahead in thinking about how do they express themselves using this style of writing.
Yeah, there's automatic feedback for both faculty members, like you're talking about too, but also for students.
Mm-hmm.
One of the tools we used is called Lex.page and
Mm-hmm.
has a built-in feedback system within it. So you write normally as you would in your normal Google Doc or Microsoft Office, and then you can call upon AI feedback at the sentence level or at the whole document. And you can then say, well, look, I'd like to have feedback just on my citations to give me some example. And I think that that's very true. So, like those individualized use cases can really help students. And we want to focus on those as well. The problem that I've come up with is where do we sort of like hit the brakes or can we hit the brakes so it just stops there?
Right.
So like you and I, we could develop an assignment and activity for our students to use AI that way too, and to talk about why they want to pause doing so. But outside of that activity, there's nothing that stops the student then going from the whole sort of framework of give me feedback on the essay. Okay, great, give me feedback. I see the things you identified. Instead of me as the writer going back through there, change those things for me and improve the essay for me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the sort of like framework where we want to say, okay, great, this was helpful for you in this sense. Now we want you to pause, we want you to stop, because that friction of you going back through the essay yourself, making those judgments about what you want to include and not include is crucial to your learning process. We don't want you to completely offload that to a machine.
Yeah.
It's a big thing.
You think it's because like it's so, it's just, um, I mean, because cheese has been around forever, like, but people have been able to, um, for lack of a better example, like to write essays or something. You could get somebody to write an essay for you. You can be able
Yeah.
to do that for forever. But now, because of that, is become almost frictionless now. Like that is like where, or even too, like thinking about being able to access, you know, well, there's a number of things you can access very, very easily that might not
Yeah.
necessarily be good for you, right?
Right.
The access becomes a lot easier. And it's like creating those, like you said, pauses or stopping points where it's
Mhm.
like, okay, where do we make the decision about? going forward versus it's so quick. It's like you're going down a slide and you don't have a chance to actually sit there and consider like, what is that next step and how much space do I need in order to take that next step?
So this is like my thinking for the fall coming up for a lot of faculty to consider is not how AI is going to impact the assessment, but how AI is going to impact learning itself. So we used reading as example too with the dissertation. One way you can introduce friction in a positive way to promote learning within a reading assignment is through social annotation. And we do this all the time. Like if you got a dissertation, if it's on a Google Doc, you're going to be commenting in line in the Google Doc usually and not just doing it at the very end, right?
Right.
That slows things down. And AI really would struggle doing that on its own because it doesn't have access to those features as well. And it shows your actual engagement with the actual reading too. We use perusal here at our university. Other universities use hypothesis to actually do social annotation. So if you're assigning a reading to a student, you can assign them to actually annotate different parts of it during this process. And that can add some really helpful friction to slow things down and ensure that learning occurs. So even if they want to use an AI reading assistant, well, again, you can't ban it because, again, some students are going to need it for issues that they might have with hidden disabilities or announced disabilities. But you can then ensure that they are actively becoming involved in some way, shape, or form within that process. And that's the same thing with everything. For writing, we do scaffolding. So it's not just the main assignment, maybe with just one peer review. We break up the entire essay over about 2 weeks into 5, 6, maybe even 7 assignments if we have time, where students produce something. Maybe it'll be AI assisted, maybe it won't. But then they're going to come together in class, they're going to talk about it. And during that class period of time, I can make the choice to have laptops be put down to and have them not use technology. They can just use each other's voices and their minds to kind of interact with this. And those are the types of learning experiences we're going to have to start exploring a little bit more in depth this fall as this technology really does become to take root more and more in education.
Well, going back again, it's like leaning into humanity, right?
Yeah.
Like, like creating those, interaction points where whether it's either comments in a Google Doc or just even like, hey, you're reading mine, I'm reading yours. What do you think about? Like, let's have a conversation about it, and how do we have those, those interaction experiences that, and again, that goes, and you're talking about what do you think about learning? And I think about, Parker Palmer wrote that book, Courage to Teach. Yeah. And he has this image of, if you're going to have the dominant form of, I think he calls it truth knowing and truth telling, where it's like the subject's at the top, the teacher's there, the subject goes down to the teacher then disseminates it. That's one way of doing it versus like having the subject in the middle and the teacher and the students are all around interacting with each other while interacting with the content. And it feels like what you're saying is we're all growing as writers, like in this case, we're all growing as writers together. And it's through our interactions with each other and with what we're producing that we're going to get better at this thing. And if that's our image of writing and not just producing, just producing a piece at the end, then that's going to help, introducing friction and really embracing the learning experience.
Yeah, I really hope so. And, it doesn't have to be technology free. Like there's ways you can do this if you're teaching online, because I know a lot of faculty are like, that works great in a classroom. We have some tools. But I'm teaching online. There are really great tools you can use. We mentioned perusal as one of them. Another tool I use is Microsoft's Flip. It used to be called Flipgrid, but it's an asynchronous video discussion. So instead of students just going to the discussion board, which my God, my students love using AI in the discussion boards. It's really another thing they have to deal with. So asking them to do what we're doing right now, your audience can't see this because they can't see our faces, but with Flip, they record their face, they record their audio, and then they respond with each other with audio too. So they can do an entire AI generated script, but they're still making the choice to actually read it, interact with each other too, if they are. And most of them, I don't think are going to do that. They're going to use their own sort of experience. They're going to talk about with each other too, because they're interested in actually having another human being discuss it with them and seeing their face. And so finding those types of, useful niches with technology can be really helpful.
Yeah. Actually, the listeners don't even know this isn't this whole podcast episode is an AI generated script, and Mark and I are just performing it. So congratulations.
Oh boy. Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
mean, so again, like the world keeps moving forward, and you think about these. I love these ideas about introducing friction, and we can put some links to some of these tools that you mentioned as well. That's going to get into something we'll talk about that about cultivating our digital garden, doing some
Oh,
digital
yeah.
gardening in a second. But what do you going beyond some of these ethical considerations, like people used to talk about the digital divide. Well, it seems like now we're going to be accessing this AI divide as well, right? And thinking about like who is access, or who has considered these sorts of ways that they can use AI, and like how do we mitigate this? How do we deal with it?
I think that the way this is being set up right now is that it will be mostly available for people in the United States for free to some degree. Now, OpenAI's commitment to do this with their newest model is going to come with rate limits. So you're not going to be able to do the whole visuals back and forth for hours at a time. You're probably going to get to the rate limit very quickly if you do it that way without paying. And that is going to become a big question about equity in terms of access to it
Yeah.
too. So it is going to become a debate. Uh, Microsoft did announce last week that they're going to fund Khan Academy for free for teachers. So you don't have to pay anything. If you want that as an instructional aid that uses AI, Khan Academy's tool for teachers is now available. I think students will still have to pay $4 a month, but for teachers, it's going to be free. Um, I think the divide is going to be, though, um, increasingly, and this is what kind of scares me, like the dystopian future, it's not Terminators running around or anything else. It's students being given access to an education. And I'm going to put up my fingers here too to do quotation marks around the word education.
Yeah.
Uh, Education that might be mitigated more and more by an algorithm, by an AI
Mm.
versus a human being. And to me, that's going to be a really big shock to a lot of people because we're used to being able to go to school and say, well, I went to the University of so and so or the College of so and so versus, oh, I got my college education from an algorithm at OpenAI University or something
Mm.
else. I have no idea what that's going to do to the landscape of education or what it means for learning or jobs or anything else. But it is something that some people are now talking about on the horizon. And that's going to have some pretty big shifts, not just in the United States, but probably in the global South too, where this technology I think it's got the most impact there, just because of resources and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, always you're catching me because now I'm thinking about that. But to be continued. But as folks are thinking, some educators being in their summer and they're thinking about how to incorporate AI into their teaching, and like, what do you think, like educators, what are these skills that they need to start to work on and think about with, I mean, again, because the landscape's always changing. So what are the skills that you think educators need to have to effectively incorporate AI into their teaching practices?
Well, I think everyone, both teachers and students, are going to need basic AI literacy.
Mm-hmm.
That's to know how to use the tools, when the tools actually hallucinate, and what use cases the tools are not very good for.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you have time and you have resources, the ability to try to develop critical AI literacy is going to be really important too. That goes beyond just how the tools work. It goes into the much deeper conversations that we've been having here too about, job displacement. The tools are incredibly energy heavy. They have a major environmental impact. They are not safe natively. They have had to be trained to be safe too. OpenAI used an army of workers in Kenya and paid them $2 an hour to do so. So there's massive ethical questions there too. There's issues of bias and everything else.
Yeah.
So I think that you can't ignore AI. You really can't. That doesn't mean you have to start using AI with your actual students. You can be teaching them about these subjects. Casey Fleischer, I believe is her name. She has a wonderful link of, I think it's a Google sheet that she keeps updated of AI stories, and she has it basically organized about ethics, about jobs, about everything else. So if you don't want to teach about AI, if you don't teach with AI, but you want to teach about AI, you can use a resource like that to have your students begin reading and talking about and really understanding how it impacts their world. The actual tools themselves, I'd be pretty cautious about asking students, especially in K through 12 classes, to sign up for it just yet. For our own students too, in universities, probably need to make sure that if you're going to use it, that students understand that they are going to be exposing their data to some way to these different algorithms and making that choice both effectively and understanding that too.
And so I guess too, that gets into this idea, and we talked about it within our the workshop that you held last summer. This idea of a digital garden, and we're doing digital gardening, and that seems to be something that when I was talking about this with colleagues and my own family about what did I learn, I think that was a concept that brought up that this kind of makes sense with regards to the changing landscape and everything. Can you describe the concept of a digital garden and maybe even what's in your garden and how do you cultivate it?
Yeah. Well, a digital garden is really just a way to learn in public using different types of either social media or your own blog to actually begin to sort of exploring a challenging problem like this that's evolving before our eyes. So my digital garden is a Substack, which is a newsletter. I keep it free from everyone too. I try to do about once a week, sometimes less than that if I'm too overwhelmed, and just writing my ideas about what's going on in the world too, and sending it out there and having other educators, other people, the general public interact with that too, and see how our thinking about these models is changing. So it's really about learning in public and putting yourself out there, which can be a little bit scary in some ways because social media is still very much so a cesspool in a lot of ways. And it's also fractured. It's all over the place. There's now Twitter, now X, Blue Sky, which is the one that a lot of educators are on, LinkedIn. I think a few people are still on Mastodon. And now we have Threads too from Meta as well. So it's kind of all over the place. But really, it's an opportunity for you to start exploring how other people are basically dealing with the same things you are, reading what they've written as well too, and getting into a situation where you can kind of come up with some responses in public. I basically have come up with most of what I've talked about here today through digital gardening right now, interacting with other people online too. I think Mahi Bali, she teaches at the American University in Cairo. She has a wonderful version of the digital garden she talks up, and she writes a lot about what it means to have critical AI literacy and gives you examples that you can kind of click through and link into as well. My Substack post, the series I'm doing right now, is about beyond ChatGPT, getting people really prepared for the fall, thinking beyond just text generation. So I'll spend a week just talking about AI's impact on reading, on critical note taking, on research, on math questions, about academic misconduct and tutoring and all those things. And it's really straightforward to get started. It's just a little bit of work to keep up to date with it. But if you feel like you are sort of lost and you need to have some support this way, the best thing to do is to get online and start looking at different communities too and keeping up to date with them.
And I think that, and again, going back to my kind of anxiety about all this is like, I like what I do, but it's like thinking about what is this, or being knowledgeable about what is out there and think as like, it always like it, even though like, hey, there's lots more that's coming, but there's still, it reduces the anxiety and be like, well, one, we're a part of a community. There is like the human connections that exist without there. And that is even through the technology, we're existing through that, making those connections with folks across the globe, even on thinking about these, and like the humanity is there. And I think that's what's kind of the beautiful part about this is, thinking about these issues together is kind of reassuring in that itself.
It should hopefully be reassuring too. I mean, it reassures me just talking with you. It makes me feel better about a lot of this, to be honest with you. Because I do think we get into these modes where we kind of start seeing students not as human beings, but like as a block of just they're students. They're going to cheat. They're going to do this. And that's never a good sort of attitude to bring to these conversations. Students are human beings. They're just like us. They're making these choices in real time, just like we are too. And all they're really looking for at this point in time for us is just some guidance. And that can be challenging with how quickly the technology is evolving. Definitely.
Right. Well, and you think like these responses that you've had to like how to, whether it's introduce friction or to think about, again, some of these other issues that we brought up is like the leaning into humanity, right? Was the response where the students are using generative AI for creating reflections where it's like, hey, that's not it's not quite going to work. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about it. Well, that's probably not the best use of this tool. And what do you really? I really want to know what you think. I really want to know what you have and bring that to the table. And so again, that leaning into humanity, it kind of I think helps us. It helps me definitely. Like, hey, there's a good response, right?
I think so too. I think so too.
So how is your, just we're kind of getting close to wrapping up. How has your perspective on teaching changed since you started this work? I mean, I can't imagine thinking about there's probably a demarcation of pre-AI in education and after, but like what are some of the highlights?
Well, I think this is really maybe not reconsider teaching, but it's actually made me kind of fall in love with teaching too. You mentioned before too, the humanity we've been finding with our students. One thing I've been doing with a lot with my students is through open pedagogy, asking them what sort of frameworks that they could come up with for how they want to use AI, not just with me in my class too, but how they want to use it when they graduate and go into whatever field their discipline is in. And they can create assignments also for other students too. And so we love doing that with them too and talking with them and hearing what they're thinking about. So yeah, it's definitely been a pretty amazing time to do this. It's also, as we've talked about too, very anxiety inducing too. My major fear now is that going forward, we're not going to be thinking about how students are using the technology. It really is going to shift to how faculty start using the technology and why they're using it too. We mentioned the feedback thing. That's definitely going to be on people's minds this next year for sure. And trying to guide them to use this as ethically as they possibly can, because the one thing I'm seeing a lot of the advertising on social media to teachers about is, hey, you're burnt out. Hey, you're way too overwhelmed. Here's AI that's going to help you do that. And what I've tried to focus on is don't use the technology to try to address the material conditions of your working situation. Don't let that be something that's going to do that because it will definitely impact, I think, your relationship with your students. And it's not going to help your actual job too if you start using this. To offload those parts of it too.
Yeah. Again, that prioritizing human connections, right? And so we can use that to enhance that. So you kind of mentioned some things, but maybe it's a way to consolidate. Where can listeners learn more about your work and connect with you? I mean, I would say you're a great LinkedIn follow, but
I'm on LinkedIn. If you don't like LinkedIn, I'm still on X. Twitter, I'm on Blue Sky, and I try to blog, my newsletter is on a Substack that's free. It's called Rhetorica, and it's once a week, and it explores a lot of these different challenges with AI.
Nice. And then I know there's some things going on, especially for folks in Mississippi that they could take advantage of. Do you want to just share that or anything else to promote?
Yeah. So broadly in the state of Mississippi, there's a AI conference in Jackson in July called Southern Spark, and I'll speak at that. That will be very interesting, talking about different educators throughout the state of Mississippi and how they're using AI. And then if you're a University of Mississippi faculty member, we will be hosting, in theory, fingers crossed on this, if everything works out, another institute for AI for teachers at some point in time in August. And regardless if that works out, we will have some programming available to all Mississippi faculty members at the University of Mississippi that will be Zoom-based also for the fall. I would hope we would be able to open up that nationally to people is the big thing too, because we've been asking as well. It is a little bit terrifying when you're holding a Zoom and you have 1,000+ people on the actual version of it. So we definitely have some logistical challenges to think about before we commit to doing that. But we're going to be going pretty much full speed on different types of faculty development to help educators navigate this emerging landscape.
Nice. And I know also too, it was interesting when we were in our workshop that there was somebody, was it from the Washington Post?
Yeah, it's Molly Roberts from the Washington Post,
And then produced an article on the great stuff that y'all have been doing over there at representing the University of Mississippi.
It was great. No, she did a really wonderful write-up, and it was a profile in the Washington Post. But yeah, having to do a workshop for the very first time, which I'd never done anything like that before too, and with 23 faculty members, and I think it was through some people from my own department too, but you guys are in education. We had people in
Yeah.
the law, we had people everywhere else, and also a reporter from the Washington Post there
Yeah.
too. It was pretty crazy.
No pressure. No pressure.
No, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I know that the folks that I was in that conversation with, or at that workshop with, we've continued that conversation throughout the year. We've been thinking about the tools and things and how we're going to respond to that. So one, it started great conversations. Two, like if we feel supported and that we have resources right here across the campus that we can use in order to bounce off ideas. And the thing that I heard more and more often is, it was about, well, what do we mean by learning? And you
Right.
keep saying that over and over again, Mark. And I think that's something that, probably we maybe have gotten away from. And now maybe this is a great thing that we have to, hey, really think, well, what do you mean by this? And,
Yeah.
what do you mean by learning? And what are we looking for with regards to evidence that someone has learned? And those are great conversations to have as educators. So thank you for pointing that out, and thank you for all your tireless work in thinking about AI in education, and finally for coming on the podcast and sharing
Oh, you're
some of
welcome,
your time
Joel,
and
and thank you.
expertise.
I really do appreciate it, and I think that those conversations are too. And this doesn't work unless people like you are having those conversations within your own departments too on campus too. So I greatly appreciate that as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mark. Appreciate you. Kind of lucky to have Mark working at the University of Mississippi and sharing all his knowledge. And then as he continues to accumulate knowledge in this area, being able to share it, hopefully those out there that are listening that are at the University of Mississippi tap into some of those opportunities that they offer through the Department of Writing and Rhetoric, or that Mark is offering or will continue to offer, that we can continue to grow and develop as teachers that leverage the power of AI in our teaching. And again, figuring out how to teach better with these tools. And so I'm excited to continue to learn and develop as well. So again, all those links and things we'll put in the show notes at amazonplant.com/episode 111. And there'll be contact information in there for Mark. If you're looking to learn more, you want to follow him on some of those socials, we'll put links to all the socials he mentioned as well. Hey, now we want to get into another edition of the album of the episode. And I can't help but thinking like, well, what does music look like when we start? Like, what is going to be the first like AI artist that we listen to? I don't know. Maybe I don't want to think about that. What I do want to think about is the album of the episode that we want to feature. The second edition of the album of the episode is Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors' Dragons. So right before the pandemic in October 28th, I believe it was my birthday, October 28th of 2019, saw Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors perform at the Ford Center here on campus. And it was like my birthday present to myself. I wanted to go see some live music, and Drew Holcomb delivered. It was an amazing concert. It was right at the time when I was starting to buy vinyl records. I don't even think I had a player at that time, but between him or his band, Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors, and then the opening act of, I believe they're called Bird Talker. I've got their album too, but I bought both of those albums, and that was like the start of the collection. And just love Drew Holcomb, love his music, love specifically this album. It's got the song Family on it. Starts off with family singing in the kitchen, run through the yard, going on vacation on their credit card, and it's like, is this song about Drew's family or is this about my family? And then just all the different, family is important to me and family is important to my family, and just thinking about what that song means, and you just love it. And it just goes from there. And there's all sorts of like the song Dragons that the album is named after is a great song. It's about Drew Holcomb talking to his grandfather and having some life advice from him. And I know that if you know Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors, you know that Drew has got a very close relationship with the grandfather, had a very close relationship with his grandfather, and just would pass along that wisdom. And so it was released. So what was cool is that I figured out that concert was in a tour, probably a tour that was in support of that album, because Dragons was released on August 16th of 2019. And it's just a good listen from cover to cover. So another album of the episode means a lot to me and my family. My wife and I have seen Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors several times. Also love what they did during the pandemic. Drew Holcomb and his wife Ellie Holcomb did all of these covers of songs, and like every night at like 6 p.m. they would go live on Instagram and probably a bunch of different socials. We saw them on Instagram and would sing a cover during the pandemic when we were all kind of closed up. And then eventually they released some of those songs that they sang, the kitchen covers that they called them, as a way to support their band while people couldn't tour during the pandemic. So I don't know. We just have a great relationship with that band. Again, the album of the episode is about, one, sharing my love of music, sharing a little bit more about me so that we can become a better teacher, because relationships are all about relationships. Improved relationships means improved teaching. And then also just to honor some of the work that these musicians do to bring some joy into the world. And definitely I've gotten a lot of joy out of the album Dragons by Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors. All right, so that's going to do it for this episode of the Amidon Planet podcast. Show notes can be found at amidonplanet.com/episode 111. You're going to want to check that out. One, we'll put a link to the Spotify, whatever, link to the Dragons album, so if you want to go check that out. But then we'll also, all the stuff that Mark mentioned that we can link to, we will put that there. You can connect with him on socials. Again, this is always growing and changing, so all the links that I'll post, they might be out of date in a few months, but following Mark is probably the greatest advice I can have, because he's going to bring not only things that AI is doing, but then also just the mindset. And that's what I love, the mindset about how to deal with it in our roles as educators. So for those of you looking for ways to support the podcast, you can subscribe, rate, review, and share this episode which will allow more people looking for similar content to find it, especially if you and your peers are struggling with, hey, how do we deal with AI? Where's a place to dive in? I think this might be a good entry point. In addition, you can subscribe to the Amidon Planet download containing teaching resources and updates from Amidon Planet. You can also submit a question, comment, or suggestion to the mailbag by sending an email to joel@amidonplanet.com. In addition, I'm always looking for opportunities to work with those that are looking to lead people to love others through teaching. If you have an event or opportunity to share, you can either send an email to joel@amidonplanet.com or head to amidonplanet.com/about to fill out the request to call form. Finally, check out those show notes to, again, connect with Mark, find any of those links that you might be looking for. Again, that's at amidonplanet.com/episode 111. Thank you for spending time on Amidon Planet. Thanks to Marc Watkins for sharing his time and expertise. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. And finally, thank you to all of you out there learning to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you have been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.